Bore da, good morning, and a warm welcome to our webinar this morning. And we're just going to wait for a few minutes just for a couple of people to be able to join us, and then we'll start in a couple of minutes. So croeso cynnes I bawb, warm welcome to you all. Right, well, Catrin Jones. I'm Dr. Catrin Jones, and I'm from Bangor University, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you today to our latest webinar discussing bridging the generations, intergenerational research. And this will be a bilingual presentation, so we will have an introduction in a minute by our simultaneous translator who will be supporting anybody who can't understand Welsh to have that translated into English later on in a minute. So this is a collaboration between Swansea, Bangor, Bristol universities as part of the Centre of Ageing and Dementia Research. And the whole aim of the centre is to increase collaboration and improve our understanding as we all become, as we all become older. Every day we're all becoming slightly older, aren't we? But the whole idea of this session today was to bring together researchers at the forefront of intergenerational research and to share best practice and to actually generate some discussion as well about this important area. You may have been involved with the Intergenerational Week that was at the end of April into May this year, and this was an event that we'd hoped to have planned for that week, but it was so busy that we decided to host it today. So anybody who was involved in that, a really busy week of raising awareness everywhere in the world, that we had sort of activities in Australia, Brazil, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, everywhere. There was really busy week. So really welcome everybody to join us today. And if you're viewing this as a recording, then obviously, hopefully you'll be able to enjoy the presentations. So our aims today are to share what's happening in the research currently ongoing in, we've got a research study in Swansea and in Bristol, and some work that we've done here in Bangor as well. And I'm going to hand over now to our simultaneous translator, Lois, who will explain how you can actually access simultaneous translation.
Okay, bore da, good morning all. In a moment, there'll be a choice at the bottom of your screen. It sometimes looks like a glove, but not always. So you'll need to click on the English if you require translation. And then if there are any contributions in Welsh, you will hear my voice automatically. So you don't need to switch or anything once you've pressed on the English. And we'll have a quick test before we start as well. Okay, diolch. If you could enable the translation, please.
Reit, diolch yn fawr Lowri, gobeithio bod chi yn gallu clywed llais Lowri yn cyfieithu chi wan. Gwych, diolch yn fawr I bawb am ddeud.
So we're always glad to work with people across universities and the public as well to see how we can improve the situation. And we want to thank Cader's team, Callie and Kim in particular, who've helped to establish this webinar today. We also have a competition, a picture competition, and there will be some information in the chat and some links. So if you do have any pictures of activities that bridge the generations, intergenerational work, then please follow the links and you can then join the journey. The pictures that win this competition will go on a journey starting with the Senedd in Cardiff and then across all museums in Wales. So hopefully you will apply to join and celebrate the excellent work that is taking place. So just to introduce the speakers today, we have Steph, first of all, talking about her PhD, looking back and forward over the past 30 years in relation to policy and support to intergenerational work and how intergenerational work can be sustainable within the context of social care for older people. We'll then go on to listen to Lois Beach, who will talk about her research at the University in Bristol that's been concentrating on the influence of the relationship and the policies that look at intergenerational work in the context of a particular music programme that was in 3 care homes in Bristol called Rebuilding Bridges. And then we'll move on to Mirain, and Mirain will talk about her research jointly with Cyngor Gwynedd, looking at different age groups in the intergenerational work and talking about the challenges and opportunities that came because of lockdown. And we'll also talk about our research in the University of Bangor in relation to the popular series Hen Bam Bach, Toddlers to Dementia. And then the presentations will be brief and succinct, that will give a brief taste to you, and we'll encourage everyone to take part in the chat and to send your questions to the panel in the chat, if you will. And we'll hopefully have an opportunity for everyone to share ideas, responses, or questions for everyone who's participated this morning. So without further ado, I would encourage you to sit back, enjoy, and I'd like to introduce, first of all, Steph Green. If Steph shares her research first of all, and the translation will then recommence when I and Mirain talk later on.
Yeah, thank you, Catrin. Let me just see if I can get the slides working. Here we go. Great. So yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Steph. As Catrin said, I'm a third-year PhD student at Swansea University. I also work with the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research, supporting care home research. That's my speciality, really, is care home research. So in the next few slides, I want to give you an introduction to my PhD journey and some of the initial findings. And I've got my email address here, which I can also put in the chat if you want to find out more, if you want to chat beyond the webinar today. So the title of my PhD really focuses on this word sustainable. So creating a sustainable landscape for long-term care in the UK, taking this intergenerational approach, which is why we're all here today to talk about what an intergenerational approach is and how it might be applied in the UK, really. And just a recognition there of my supervisors and my funders at Swansea University. So without further ado, click forwards. Great. So I'm starting off with this image of the Old People's Home for 4-year-olds series, which was aired on Channel 4 in the UK in about 2017. Because it was this programme, along with the BBC programme, Toddlers Who Took on Dementia, which I know we'll be hearing more about later on in the webinar today, that really inspired my journey into this PhD and into this topic. Because I watched these programmes and I thought, why aren't we doing more of this? Why is this being presented as this sort of novel, innovative, one-off thing, this experiment? It just seemed to make so much sense to me to connect generations together. So that was the starting point of me applying for funding and kind of getting going in this area. So the summary of my PhD is focusing on the fact that I noticed there was this momentum, this movement around intergenerational care in the UK, with sort of seeing it on the television, but also hearing about it from care home managers in my other work. So I wanted to explore what had been going on, what were the policy and practice developments of this approach, particularly in the context, as we all know, of social care being in a crisis, which it has been for many years and still is. So I was really interested to find out if and how an intergenerational approach might fit into a more sustainable way of delivering care in the UK. So my two main questions of this PhD exploration are on the screen. They are a little bit long-winded, but basically the first one's asking, where have we come from So which factors have contributed to these sort of developments in the field over the past 30 years? And I picked 30 years because I noticed that's kind of when it started to begin in the US. So although I'm focusing on the UK, I wanted to zoom out a bit and find out, well, have we been influenced by the US? You know, where has this all come from? And secondly, then, where are we going? So what potential value might this model or these models, because we know they exist on a continuum of intergenerational practice, what value might they have in shaping a more sustainable landscape here in the UK? So to do this, my starting point was thinking about this word innovation. So I was wondering, is this really innovative or has it happened before? I was kind of noticing there'd been an explosion of developments, if you like, over the last sort of decade, particularly in the UK. So I looked into this briefly and I found out, although there's some research on the benefits to older people and younger people, like in this picture, there was not much really about what have been driving the developments, what are the other factors, and what else is involved in this picture. So how are we going to learn more about its sustainability? And I know that Mirain had been doing some work up in North Wales around this, but apart from that, I couldn't find much else in the UK that looked at sustainability. So I started by, I love this quote by Mirain. She says, "I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going." And that really resonated. So I thought it was really important to look backwards first. So that's why I decided in the first phase to undertake a scoping review of the evidence from the last 30 years. Like I said, that's kind of the starting point in the US, to look at what's been going on, what's been driving these developments. So I used these three key search terms on the screen: intergenerational, care homes, and program activity, different combinations of those in the searching. And I don't have enough time to tell you the full results of this review, but I want to give you one take-home message. So really there was a whole range of different driving forces, from micro level factors like an individual who's very passionate about the cause and has developed something, all the way up to those more wider macro level factors. So social policy in the UK really came across to me as being one of the key influences in driving developments. And so that's what led me to my second phase of the PhD, which is social policy analysis. So this is my key question: is how has this concept been developed? How's this intergenerational concept been developed in the context of UK social policy between 2008 and 2020? And I picked those dates because that seemed to be when it kind of came into being, if you like, in the UK. I mean, we didn't really even have the word intergenerational before that point. That came about with the Beth Johnson Foundation definition, which I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with. And what I found from this analysis, again, one take-home message, is that the intergenerational concept has been framed as a solution to quite a number of different policy problems. So that's ranged from it being able to fix, this is how policy is framing it, as it being able to fix social cohesion, being able to support community safety, which is sort of more talked about in Northern Ireland policy. And most recently, and what you'll probably be more familiar with, is it being framed as a solution to social isolation and loneliness, which is kind of presented as this epidemic in the UK. And what I found was this concept is framed in policy as being a solution in this neoliberal context. So that means that the policy kind of positions the problem of isolation and loneliness as resting with the community. So it's our fault that there's so much isolation and loneliness, and doesn't really mention all those systemic factors about how services are so segregated and all those types of factors. So in that sense, it's able to position a solution as well with the community. So it's very positive all the time, very encouraging of intergenerational practices. It really promotes it as one of these great solutions to fixing loneliness and isolation. However, it does this by not attaching very much resource or investment, which is one of the issues, particularly in the UK, that it's promoted as a really good thing to do, and yet there's not really, to date, been a huge amount of investment with resources. Key finding, if we're thinking about sustainability, then I'd kind of suggest it needs to be reframed how it's positioned in policy. So that's just one of the things I've been finding out in the PhD so far. And then I decided I do need to dig a bit deeper, and I'd really like to hear from some of the key stakeholders involved in the field, and not just sit at my desk and read lots of policy documents. So I decided to interview key stakeholders across the UK, because I was also interested in, are there any similarities and differences across the UK nations? And this was mid-pandemic, but luckily everyone was very up to speed with Zoom by then. So I managed to do 22 interviews across people in practice, like it says, care staff, health board representatives, and some national leaders in the field, also policy representatives, to really get that spectrum of opinion about these two main questions. Where have we come from, and where do you think we're going? And I pulled on some of those findings from both the scoping review and the social policy analysis to dig a bit deeper. Again, I could take the next hour or so telling you all about the results. But one of the take-home messages really is, again, that it's a combination of factors from micro. So those passionate individuals who've really driven things locally that are that grassroots level. So this kind of bottom-up development, but also things have been influenced by the macro top-down kind of policy initiatives. And more recently, we've even seen, so Scotland's taking the approach where it's kind of shifting a little bit away from loneliness and isolation and a bit more towards a human rights approach. So actually positioning into an intergenerational approach as something which should be a human right. So you can almost see the narrative starting to shift away from, oh, isn't this just a great thing to do, towards actually connecting with humans should be one of our fundamental human rights. And another of the stakeholders also said, you know, they wouldn't want to be in a care home without the guarantee there's going to be lots of connections, not just in care, having your physical needs, your care needs met, but also that fundamental need for connecting with other humans and the wider community, and in this case with other children, so that intergenerational approach. So I'm aware of the time, and that's been a whistle-stop tour of my research to date. But like I said, please do get in touch if you want to discuss more about my research. And I'm looking forward to chatting at the end of the presentation. So please do put any questions in the chat box. So Diolch yn fawr, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steph. And that's an excellent start to our webinar, isn't it? Because we really do need to, where we understand where we're coming from, but on a policy level, where's this actually going? Because you know, we're all very aware of that positivity around intergenerational, but maybe slightly frustrated that it's not actually going at the pace that we'd maybe be passionate for it to be going at. So that's really fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So we're going to hand over now to Lois Peach, who's been researching just over the border in Bristol. And it's really exciting to invite Lois to join this webinar, because we're very aware of the hard work that you've been doing as part of your PhD, and it's really exciting for us to hear about your work. So croeso, warm welcome to Lois.
Thanks very much, Catrin. And yeah, thank you for kicking us off, Steph, with that really detailed overview of your findings so far. And I think our kind of approach towards research overlaps in that we're both interested in what happens within this intergenerational space, not just focusing on the benefits that we know, as Steph said, that has contributed to this narrative around intergenerational practice as being one that's a good thing and a nice to have, and we're very much on board with that, but taking a slightly more critical approach and thinking about, okay, if we already know that these programs have benefit to participants and the wider community and those involved, then how can we replicate that in the UK context, and what happens? So my PhD at the University of Bristol is researching non-family members coming together in these intergenerational spaces, particularly within social care, and looking at different ways to research and understand these intergenerational relationships. I'm just going to move on to the translated slides, but I'll keep talking about this topic. So in order to do that, my research is really focused on the process, how these intergenerational relationships are formed. And to do that, I've conducted a series of multi-method qualitative research and evaluation into intergenerational programs that have involved preschool children and older adults living in residential care, including those living with dementia. So in this presentation, I hope to sort of provide a little bit more detail about how the approach taken to sort of researching those programs helps to shed a bit of light onto that question of how can we research intergenerational work differently and produce different knowledge that hopefully, similar to Steph, helps develop these practices in this country. Okay, so the best way that I've found to break this up is kind of in two sort of separate focuses. So I can look at, in terms of my research questions around the nature of interactions, I've kind of looked at two different approaches. So looking at theoretical ways to understand those interactions, and also trying to experiment with creative methodologies to kind of look at those interactions. So the first kind of part of my PhD was a reanalysis of some observational data that I conducted as part of my master's in policy research, looking at an intergenerational program with the nursery school that was involved in that TV program that Steph mentioned, the Old People's Home for 4-year-olds. So following that program, the nursery preschool tried to implement a local intergenerational program, and I came along to help evaluate that from the perspective of what benefits did the children gain. So that was part of my master's, and in particular I was really fascinated by this one interaction where children and the residents kind of were around a coffee table and they were playing with Play-Doh, and they were sort of molding it into different shapes, sort of experimenting with it. And one child sort of held a circular piece of Play-Doh in the air and said he'd made some cookies. And the activity kind of continued, and residents were also playing with the Play-Doh. And then at one point, it was found that one of the residents was eating the Play-Doh. And for my master's, I was looking at this interaction from the perspective of children. So thinking about how their reaction to the resident eating the Play-Doh was an experience of learning about the residents, about dementia, and also was a way of developing empathy towards different ways of engaging with the world. And then for my PhD, I kind of felt like in that interaction, I'd had a very narrow focus on looking on what the children had gained, and that there was so much else going on in this space that I was missing in terms of how the Play-Doh may have enabled or constrained that kind of intergenerational moment, that intergenerational learning. And so I used post-human and feminist new materialist theory to think about this Play-Doh cookie, to think about how different people, things, practices, ideas about dementia and knowledge and empathy were coming into that space. And then I wanted to continue kind of exploring those theories, but I wanted to research another program, and specifically I got in contact with Mirain, who some of you might be aware of, who is doing some fantastic work in the south west in Torbay around bringing childminders and children into care homes. And because of the pandemic, those practices had kind of shifted, modified to online sort of connection, and they were really interested in reigniting that kind of physical in-person interaction as we were sort of emerging out of the pandemic. And so they put together this program called Rebuilding Bridges, which was an intergenerational music program over 8 weeks in the autumn of 2021. So I was involved in the research and evaluation of this kind of socially distant music program. And as part of that, again, focusing on the nature of those interactions in this kind of distanced space, I used narrative methods to kind of piece together a storybook of some of the things that happened. So you can see the copy of the storybook there, but it's also available online, and I'll post the link in the chat at some point if you're interested. And so this is about taking all of the different perspectives of those that were involved in the program and weaving them together to create a kind of, as I put here, a messy and wonderfully productive, complex narrative of what happened during the program, and kind of exploring that for what knowledge it might tell us about intergenerational practices. And in terms of that, it's about that kind of collective processing, storying, that kind of might shift us away from individualized and outcome-oriented kind of perspective towards a kind of the ethos of intergenerational work about bringing people together, and about the kind of the power in the collective, if you like. And so where to next with my research? And so really, with the Rebuilding Bridges project, there were multiple different methods that I used, not just the storying, but interviews after each of the sessions, and also at the end with childminders, residents, the musicians and artists themselves, and other people involved, and kind of bringing those all together and starting to sort of analyze them, for mimicking that Play-Doh reanalysis that I did. So what other things were involved in terms of how the space, the objects, and the activities may have enabled or constrained the kind of connection, the intergenerational connection that we're looking for in these programs. And storying is that using those intergenerational stories to guide that analysis, because a story isn't just an object. As we tell it over and over again, we produce different meanings and create different ways of knowing and doing intergenerational practice through these kind of retelling of the event. And so the attention will be not just on the accuracy of the stories, but on the quality of their promise to inform future activities and inquiries into intergenerational research. And I'm also going to explore other aspects of intergenerational practice that are potentially neglected or missing from the way that we do research, that often favor single generation kind of outcomes. And I think we, as researchers, we need to be more responsive to what our research does in terms of the knowledge and practices that we kind of reinforce through our approaches. So yeah, as I said, more research mimicking the ethos of intergenerational work. And part of that, I'm working with the care home fans intergenerational linking project as part of my Home Life England and the linking network. And so they've got this community broker role that's bringing together schools, youth groups and care homes. And so I'm really interested in that as a potential aspect of the research that we don't know too much about as yet. And that is me. As Steph said, please do get in contact with me if you have any more questions. And I look forward to some more discussion after the next presentation. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lois. It's really exciting to see how the develops have emerged from your initial master's research into just observing that one interaction in a deep way has actually flourished into something so much more. And lovely to hear about your collaboration as well with the community. Well, fantastic, and all the best. So next we're going to use a simultaneous translation again. So we're going to ask Laurie to join us.
So we will be talking next. Mirain and I will talk and share a little of our work here in North Wales at the University in Bangor. And I'll move the slides. So the aim, we're a bit of a double act. We both collaborate here to share a bit of the work that we've undertaken here at the University in Bangor together with CAS and Gwynedd Council. My work, I'm a lecturer in dementia studies, but have also undertaken some parenting research. So I'm very interested in the links between and supporting people through different periods of their lives. And I've been very fortunate that Mirain has joined us in the research and looking at intergenerational work. I'll let her talk a little bit more about her work in due course, but in the context of the university, there's a long relationship with the community and also raising awareness in relation to the advantages of connecting people through the arts. We have work with Gwawr, who's taken some students who were studying at the university and at the technical college, studying music, and taking them to sing with people, not performing, but singing with people, Corneli Cyr. You can see a few wonderful videos online. And also we've put a link in the chat in relation to the visual arts, and Denbighshire County Council have collaborated a lot in relation to understanding how we can connect people in the community with primary school children who come to work with people with dementia patients, and it has an impact, a positive impact on all concerned. And another incident in local care home, Lleisiau, where students who studied health and care came to chat with older people, get to know them, recording those chats, and then they were shared as part of a performance in the Arts Centre. So there's quite a bit of history here. But as I mentioned, back in 2016, we worked with a company called TODDLERS to look at what the impact would be if we brought older people within the community, some living with dementia, some living with isolation or needing some assistance, to socialise in a day centre for older people, and then the children who were receiving care in a private nursery close by, travelling to join them and joining them for 3 days, because 3 days of filming were available for each centre, and we travelled Wales in that series to see what was happening. And we looked at the interaction, and the programme was on S4C in Welsh, but we also did an English version in a centre for people who lived with dementia, and looking at whether or not the same experiences and opportunities were available and what the impact would be. Having considered the study with Lynwen Hamer as part of her research with us, we looked at older people and asked the older people across Wales what their experiences were and what their reflections were about the 3 days with the younger children doing the activities that we encouraged, and individually. Everyone had enjoyed. It had increased the confidence of many, and many of them wanted more of these opportunities. And in the research that we undertook, looking at the well-being and isolation and satisfaction with life, all of them went in the right direction. In addition to asking the older people who were a part of the work, Lynwen also asked the parents to see what their reflections were. And I'll share a bit more about that later. But the older people said that they would love the children to come every day, and that children treat the older people like anyone else, and that they don't. They're not scared of interacting. And older people also forgot about their worries and felt young in spirit when with the young children. Having spoken to the parents only saw what the children said after they got home after the 3 days with the older people. They hadn't seen the programmes, so these were their reflections initially and after the filming, and they were all positive, and they felt it was a positive project and that they would like it to happen again. And I know we have some work in Australia that has taken this quite a bit further, and hopefully we can have a chat about that later. But for me, it was the unexpected stars that I felt was worth pausing for a moment to discuss. We all know of these characters who've always been motherly or enjoyed young children or brought up their own families, but the older people who were possibly worried about what was going to happen and maybe dismissed by the adults around them because of difficulties in communicating, because of a stroke, for instance. And Glyn over here on the left enjoyed making some cakes with this little boy. But the important thing was Glyn had had difficulties communicating because of a stroke, but his ability to entertain and to have fun with that child and to have a relationship over a period of time was quite astonishing. And then the gentleman on the right had had periods of feeling pretty low after having lost his wife and had many bereavements and was uncertain how he'd be, but so careful of them when they were in the centre with him. So a few brief ideas of what came out of our brief period with the work. We then went on to conduct some further research, and I'd like to introduce Mirain Roberts to discuss those. So good morning all. So back in 2018, I started some research with Dr. Catrin Jones and Dr. Lynn Williams at the University of Bangor, looking at the challenges faced by intergenerational projects, concentrating in particular on how to make them more sustainable in the long term. The research was broken down into 3 sections. First, looking at scoping, looking at papers and looking at the challenges and hurdles. And then what we saw was that many of the papers and research concentrated on the benefits, the obvious benefits from the intergenerational projects, but very few concentrated specifically on the challenges and the hurdles that prevent projects from being sustainable. We then did some research SurveyMonkey across Wales, and there were 2 questionnaires, one for those who were aware of intergenerational work and one for those who weren't. And it was as important for us to hear from individuals who weren't aware of the work of the intergenerational work to tackle why they weren't taking part and why those projects did not succeed. What became very apparent was that many people didn't know how to go about taking part in these activities, and also in many communities, people didn't understand that this work was happening quite naturally in their communities and didn't label it as such. And then I went to concentrate on 4 case studies with Cyngor Gwynedd, 2 looking at primary schools and those primary schools who were attending care homes, 1 primary school going into additional care homes, and 3 projects with a further education college doing a number of things. So some were studying beauty and were going into the care homes to paint some nails and have a chat in doing so. And then another project, Gyda'n Gilydd, where older people from the community came to the college for a period to enjoy a number of activities and lunch. And that project was an exceptional one that has stayed in our minds. So during the case studies, I had some focus groups with the students and then conducted one-to-one interviews with facilitators for the project to learn more about how to conduct these interviews or conduct these projects. From the scoping review, 5 themes arose, and in relation to how to make intergenerational projects more sustainable. One of them was planning. And whilst it's a matter of taking projects to happen quite naturally once there, it's important to arrange things like transport for the events and the logistics, as it were, or the things behind the curtains. The importance of the 2 generations became important, and quite often what people raised was that people from education looked at the importance for children alone, and then the care people looking at the importance for older people. But it was important to look at the projects with an overview of both, rather than focusing on one and not the other. And also there was an importance in preparing by having discussions beforehand with individuals taking part. Maybe talking about age and spending time with both generations before having the project. And then having dementia projects for the younger pupils and having open conversations with the older people as well, because quite often they can be quite nervous, especially after 2 years apart. We had a project last week and that became very apparent, where everyone was very shy to come together, but loved once things had started. And another thing that became apparent was that the true potential is yet to be understood fully. This is apparent for all of us. Why else would there be so much research undertaken? That the potential from these projects is yet to be understood, and how intergenerational work can contribute to many important agendas. Another thing that was concerning was the time that was available. Quite often people didn't know how often to have these projects, how long. And the main thing that came out of this was how it's important to be very flexible and adjust as things go along and as people decide what's best. And then from the case studies, time was again a factor, and also the importance of trying to find what works best for that specific group, and that there's no one answer that fixes all. The additional costs was a problem in relation to sustainability, especially in rural areas where we have in Gwynedd. And as we face additional costs of transport. The numbers were also challenging, where people felt that they didn't have the right balance to be able to do the intergenerational work, and they were worried about this and the balance of the project. Another theme was the flexibility or adaptability and support available, and the need to have consistent and regular support for them to be sustainable, and how individuals who facilitate, if the passion is there, that makes such a difference. And then another theme was that from the staff that they felt that the intergenerational projects put additional workloads on their additional day-to-day projects. But the other side of the coin was that people talked about making their work easier. And one quote that is not from my research, but recently with the project Connections in Denbighshire, Welsh Government recorded a short video, and I'll share the links later. And there, the teacher has talked about how the project benefited the work that she did and offered something beyond the syllabus and what she could offer with worksheets or normal classes. Following on from this, we looked at establishing a model for Wales and how to be able to develop the intergenerational work across Wales. At the moment, it happens in pockets across Wales, and there's no one national movement putting more emphasis or encouraging intergenerational work. And we saw that this happened on three levels. On a personal level, individuals have a social conscience, and they need to do things to help with social matters such as isolation, age, and so on. Also, on a personal level, the ignorance or lack of knowledge and how to start on these projects. We then had the community element, where it was clear in certain areas that intergenerational work was totally traditional, and then the importance of having a facilitator or that passionate individual that arranges the projects and does the work. Also the importance of organising, which comes with a facilitator or with a group of people that are passionate for the work. And then on a national level, the research, it was apparent from the interviews that it was that more emphasis from government policies was required. And policies need to be in place, providing support to the work. We are very fortunate that there is a strategy recently in October 2021, a generation that is getting older and looking at dementia, and the curriculum from Donaldson is coming into force in September. Gemma will know better, and that again goes hand in hand with the intergenerational work, but we may need to establish more support to facilitate and to be able to put things in place. We also, clearly, many of us hear about the programmes and also the 4-year-olds who took on dementia, and this shows the influence, the national influence of the media, and how those kind of projects encourage people to go about establishing their own projects. And that's very clear, because I wouldn't be in post as an intergenerational officer full-time without a hen plant bach. So it does show the potential, which is beyond the media. And finally, the potential hasn't quite yet been realised or understood, and we're still trying to understand its impact, but are developing at all times. And for instance, recently, the Home Share UK project that develops across Britain, 23 projects are active at the moment across Britain, with 3 of them going to be in place in Wales, and where Bridging the Generation can tackle many social challenges. For instance, not being able to afford rent to stay in their homes, offering homes, and the other side, it can be an example of support, low-level support through intergenerational work. And we need to think beyond the two generations or the two extremes and how we can develop this further. During COVID, after my research, I had 6 months as a coordinator at Gwynedd Council and an opportunity to start to put things in place. Unfortunately, COVID then came and I then had to adjust. However, it was good to be able to continue to put what I'd learned during my research in practice, to start to establish sustainable projects. But also back in 2019, Welsh Government released a paper on the mechanisms for intergenerational work, specifically looking at the level of research, Kaplan research. And during COVID, it was clear that it was possible to continue with the lowest levels, the levels where people did not come together, rather than the highest level where people met each other weekly and did a lot together. However, what this also showed was that all of the levels of intergenerational work were important to reduce isolation, to challenge ageism, or any other benefits that is attached to this type of work. And we continued to do a lot of work during COVID to continue to increase awareness about this type of work, but also to continue to ensure that the benefits are available across Wales. And you'll see here, there's one in July, but we continued to conduct meetings. We had a conference in 2019, and during lockdown, we continued this, hoping to inspire people and to get people to do the work even in times of separation. And then there are many other exciting projects that have taken place during this period. And whilst it's very cheesy, sharing is caring, mewn undod mae nerth, and back in November 2020, undod rhwng y cenedlaethol, intergenerational solidarity cross-party groups were established, full of individuals passionate for this area across Wales, pushing the work forward. Age Cymru had an intergenerational summit during the intergenerational work and week in 2020. There's been an intergenerational week that's international, and we're pleased that Wales is one of the key partners in that week. I'm very proud that we've been able to develop and work on this moving forward. And also, a decade of healthy aging but from the WHO has been launched, and intergenerational work is one aspect that can improve many of these aspects. And Welsh Government have also released a strategy for an ageing population, and the intergenerational work can be of assistance to reach those requirements, as well as the curriculum for Wales. So before I conclude, and before we talk and have any questions, I just wanted to mention a few dates for the diary. There is a conference, 2022 conference, Challenges and Prospects. So Social Policy Association conference at the Swansea University between the 6th and 8th of July. There is still an opportunity for you to register for this project, and this is a hybrid conference, and Lois, Steph and I will be presenting during those sessions on our research. So you are welcomed to join that. And then on the 14th of July, we have an intergenerational project, and the theme is Let's Restart Our Projects, which is the concept of hearing about projects that have continued during COVID or have restarted in the past months in the hope of restarting with our work, because that's so important for all of us. And of course, we have our pictures competition that Catrin has already mentioned, which closes on the 22nd of July. And we encourage all of you to send those pictures out because it's travelling around Wales. And we hope that it will have a great influence in that respect. And also, there's a symposium, an international symposium on the advantages of inclusion and intergenerational work in July. Only collect. So back to Catrin now, but you're welcome to ask any questions because we really do want all of you to feel a part of this webinar and have an opportunity to ask questions. Thank you. And it's great to see how a small seed becomes such a fruitful piece of work, not across the county only, but across Wales as well. I'd like to thank everyone who's presented, but also to ask if there are any questions in the chat. We have a few minutes left for the link. I'm aware that the link, that everyone is busy, but if you do have any questions at all, we'd be pleased to hear from you in the chat, or any links that you'd like to share as well. Because it's only by connecting like this that we can all help one another and to help different ages, whatever their ages. Any questions? I think there has been one question from Gemma. And is there advice about reconnecting? Are there any guidelines in relation to when we can restart the face-to-face sessions? Is it up to the homes, or is it up to the owners or the council, or who? I am aware that Gemma is in the same county as I am, in Gwynedd, and in Gwynedd we have been able to start with projects, intergenerational projects, where we've been conducting these in schools and in gardens and in care homes. And certainly what I would recommend anyone to do is to get in touch with health and safety, specifically to them in the council, but to anyone who you're working for, to see what the necessary steps are. Because in the session we have in the care home, one of them in the care homes of Gwynedd, whilst there is permission for people to go into the care home now, our decision is to still conduct that outdoors to reduce the risk. And I think that's something for us all to remember, to do the small additional steps that are beyond the guidelines, just to reduce risk. So you're welcome to get in touch, Gemma, if you do want to have a chat about restarting projects in our colleague. I'm more than happy to help with that. And also we have a friendship bench that's coming to Bala, and it would be lovely to draw you into that word. We have a question from Steph.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Mirain, but sorry, you've done all the talking. It's only a quick one though about, you know, when you're talking about things on a community level in that sort of model of personal, community, national, I just wondered if you could say just a little bit more about the traditions part of it. Is it something in particular communities, or do you think it's a Welsh thing, or do you think that translates to other countries? Or
yeah,
I don't want to assume that it is a Welsh thing, but it was certainly something that we did find in some Welsh communities. Many have indicated that it's something that was happening as part of Ysgol Sul or Sunday school. I know Sunday school is not a Welsh thing, but that became very apparent as one example of intergenerational work. And also organisations such as Merched y Wawr also confirmed that they did a lot of intergenerational work that wasn't labelled as such, but it was clear that that was what it was. from the responses. Also, I think traditionally, many communities, I come from a very small village in Conwy. There, everyone was an auntie or uncle. And that's something that came across also. That everyone is an aunt or an uncle, and there's a feeling of belonging across all generations, rather than everyone in silos according to age doing their socializing. But I don't want to assume that and take all of the praise. But if we look at the logistics, I would have further information. Thank you, Mirain. And also we've had some comments here from Alison in Scotland saying, thanking us for sharing and looking forward to collaborating. And following on from that, we've also had a comment from Catrin asking for ideas for standardising practice across Wales and how to share best practice. And I think this is something, an important part of the work. We do see that the work in Scotland has moved forward significantly through the funding from the government, and it's great that the government are releasing policies that support this and have sent a website out as part of the intergenerational work. But I think there is more work to be done, because at the end of the day, it will take more time and it comes down to money. So at Cyngor Gwynedd, we've seen so much we can do by employing someone like Mirain to be passionate and to facilitate the work, and then to step back and ask the communities to take the reins. But from my point of view, Catrin, there is more work to be done, and we can learn from other countries such as Australia, such as Scotland, such as Northern Ireland, who have taken things a bit further than we have in Wales at the moment. I don't know if anybody else. Steph or Lois, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I just put my thoughts in the chat. It was along the same lines as you, Catrin, because, you know, in Wales, we did have a centre for intergenerational practice, you know, early sort of, was it 2010? And like you say, if you look to Scotland, they've been resourced and have more resource during the pandemic. And it does take that extra bit of funding and a boost, isn't it? So it's not just Mirain on her own and you in North Wales trying to share all this great stuff that's going on. I think hopefully, you know, Welsh Government are listening now and will recognise that and look to other places and see, oh, if you just sort of boost things along, it can be like a catalyst effect. It can just really speed things up a bit. And yeah, the use of the media, which came through really strongly in my research, that also has a very catalytic role. So if you put some extra funding or extra boost, you know, around sharing on social media and maybe another television program, that does really seem to capture people's attention.
I think that just to jump in there as well, is that what's so fantastic about intergenerational work when we are sharing good practice and what's going on in communities is, you know, as Catrin did and as Mirain has done, sharing the stories of the things that happen in those spaces, and that's what really captivates people's attention. And it's about pairing that, complementing that with evaluation or research that kind of not only demonstrates the benefits of it, but how we achieve those. And I think a message that came through both from Mirain and Steph and my research is also about it, addressing those challenges so that we can, we're not just saying everything is wonderful, but we're trying to develop the field moving forward. So it's about sharing good practice, what works, but also some of those challenges that we can collectively as a field and as a community of practice kind of develop.
For me personally, what's clear is that it's a human right that we all have. And that rather than moving from, isn't this nice? And that we as a group have seen that this is important, that we now move and move the conversation a bit further. I think we have a lot to learn, and I'm so glad of the opportunity to come together. I'm aware of the time and that we promised that we'd only be an hour, but I think we have a comment from Alison. For future television programmes, we need to encourage makers to give details of where people can go for more information and training. This can result in a practice. So we need to share information. Signposting, Mirain. And also, just to give a plug, because Alison shares a lot of resources with us. Generations Working Together does have a lot of resources that are helpful to individuals on their website too. And I would advise everyone to go and have a look at their website, because they also have sessions, information sessions, and an intergenerational course. And I've seen many of these are very useful. So a little plug to go and see the website to get some more information, and the hope that we in Wales can develop things to assist here as. So just a little plug. I just want to thank everyone who's contributed, your expertise, your hard work, busy in that background, ensuring that everything's gone well. Carly, Kim, and Lois, Steph, and Mirain. For your passion and hard work, it feels endless, and it feels that you go through things and work so hard, but hopefully that meeting together like this will ensure that the passion and links will continue and sustain us whilst we try and change things. So thank you very much, everyone. I think that's it. Unless anyone has any questions, we'll conclude there. And we will be sharing the links and the recording with everyone afterwards. So don't worry at all. If you've missed any links, then we'll share those with you after the event. And if you could please complete your comments on the webinar as well. We always appreciate your feedback in that respect. To Cadr, diolch.